I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Hyundai i30 Sedan. The artist formerly known as Elantra, and the car still known as Elantra in many parts of the world, has been renamed i30 Sedan here in Australia, basically to give it a bit of a leg up and let it join in with the popular i30 hatchback range. But actually, this car is quite different to the i30 hatch. For starters, it's on a new platform called K3, which the i30 hatch will probably be moved to for its next generation change in a few years' time. But people who want to buy a four-door sedan are basically being given a preview of what that platform will be like right here in this car. And as we'll find out when we take this sedan for a drive, it's actually quite a goer on a country road. It's been locally tuned for Australian roads, just as almost all Hyundais are, changes that make a real difference. But as we'll also see, that's not where the good things stop for the i30 Sedan, because the interior is also a big step forward over the outgoing Elantra. However, the first question that will be on a lot of people's minds is, can I live with this design? Personally, I think Hyundai's bold new design language is a good thing for the company. It means the cars just don't blend into the background. That being said, if you're going to go extroverted, you're going to have people who love it and those who hate it. And you can let me know down below whether you like the parametric dynamics aesthetic of the new i30 Sedan. One thing I think we'll all agree on though is that the interior is a nice upgrade. That's where we're going to go first. Then we'll have a look at the boot and finally take the i30 Sedan for a drive to see how this new four-door goes on road. But before we do that, make sure to hit subscribe below the video and hit that notification bell. i30 Sedan train spotters will notice that intro was filmed with an active with halogen headlights, yet here I am in the Elite, which has LED headlights outside, but otherwise looks pretty much exactly the same. And the reason I've done that is to show you an interior that really is as good as the i30 Sedan can be, because with this contrast black and really pale grey scheme, it honestly looks like an entry-level luxury car as opposed to a very mainstream car that's priced relatively affordably. The Elite is just over 30 grand without on-road costs. The Active starts at about 24.5 before on-road costs for a manual. So these things aren't particularly expensive, and that's especially the case when you see just how much kit Hyundai have thrown at these things. Leather appointed seats are actually standard across the range because there isn't really a kind of price leader entry-level model. There's no i30 Sedan Go, for example. It starts at the Active, moves up to the Elite, and later on the N-line models will also be coming. But it is the Elite model which shows you exactly what Hyundai have their mind on at the moment, and that is really bringing cabin technology up to compete with the best in this segment and really be the best where they can. So here in the Elite, we have twin 10.25 inch screens, one for the driver and one that sits over here in the center. It's a move that the likes of Mercedes-Benz have already implemented, but in some ways the Hyundai system is better. I mean, it's certainly a lot easier to use than the overcomplicated systems that many of the German cars have. It's touch-based, you know, it's very responsive and snappy. The resolution on both displays is pretty high. And the one in front of the driver has really clean looking gauges which change color based on the drive mode that you're in. You're also able to present some secondary information between them, but sadly you can't actually put a full map on the driver display like you can in the Benzes or Volkswagens, Skodas, etc. I really think that's a killer feature for a digital driver display, and I'm often confused as to why the layout just mimics what it would be with analog gauges. I mean, what's the use of that? If you know, let me know down below in the comments. As for the rest of the interior, there's good and bad. Love the new steering wheel, very kind of 1930s in style with these four spokes. Really think that's a nice statement piece from Hyundai. The seats are also quite comfortable. As I mentioned, these ones are in the pale grey. You can also get them in the black. The kind of effect of the interior is lessened if you go for black, but they will be considerably more durable and easy to keep clean. Now, unfortunately, the Elite model doesn't actually have power adjustable seats. We've got manual adjustment. If you do want power adjustment, you'll be spending close to 40 grand on the N-line premium model when that arrives, which also has heated and cooled front seats. We don't get those features here in the Elite, sadly. What we do get though is Bose audio, new system for the brand. I haven't heard it yet, so I can't comment on the quality, but it's an interesting move away from Infinity, I think. And in terms of practicality, it's good. Got large cup holders between the seats with two different floor heights, wireless charging, which is actually standard across the range. Okay sized door bins, but you're not going to get a litre bottle in there. And a good sized tray between the seats with felt lining, so stuff isn't going to scratch around, which is always nice. A word on quality and materials though. A bit disappointing to see hard door trims at this price. Hard trim down here where your knee rests is hardly unusual for this segment, but it would have been nice to see a soft pad. But it is good to see soft plastics up on the dash and some cool use of cloth actually in the door trim with really nice looking stitching. So on the whole, it's a pretty impressive front interior. Next up, let's have a look at the back seat. Moving to the back of the i30 Sedan, it really comes down to one word, and that is space. They've made this car longer than the Elantra that it replaces, and they've really been clever about packaging the interior to absolutely max out the amount of room you get back here. The i30 Sedan is a small car. It's classified as a small car in the sales figures, but really it's grown so much that it's what we would used to have referred to as a medium car. And you can absolutely see that in terms of the space on offer in the back. I'm 6 foot, sitting behind my own driving position, and the legroom I have is immense, as big as some large sedans. Tow room's okay, and headroom is fine, even though we have this sort of coupe roofline in the i30 Sedan that looks pretty good. Now, compared to the Elantra, we actually have 58mm more legroom in the back, which is a huge step up from generation to generation, and it just means that people back here are going to be really comfortable. You don't necessarily have to go for a big lumbering SUV to get a spacious back seat, as this car proves. Even the middle seat is usable. There's not too much of a hump in the floor, and the width is okay. We do get a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. We get a map pocket, just a single one on the back of the passenger seat. But I'd also like to point out the fact that that cloth that you see in the doors is actually repeated here on the back of the front seats, and it actually looks quite nice, and it gives you a bit of visual interest while you're sitting here in the back, which is a good thing because once again, we have those hard materials sadly in the back of this car. This just helps to soften it and liven it up just a touch. So we've headed around the back of the i30 Sedan, which is certainly one of this car's most dramatic angles, and I actually think it looks pretty good out on the road, having driven behind one up here today on the launch program for this car. And actually, just quickly, over my right shoulder, there's the N line. So even though this car is not going to launch in Australia until the end of 2020, it's very much progressed. It's finished being tuned for Australia. It's just that normal production hasn't actually started for the N line yet. Hyundai are firing off the normal 2-litre models off the production line, and then very shortly the turbo models will start being built. So that explains the delay. Now, as I mentioned, dramatic angles here. We kind of have this integrated ducktail spoiler, which is pretty cool. We have a full-length reflector strip across here, which is very 1980s, but I really like it actually, and pretty tidy in terms of badging. It's also a good moment to talk about how you get this boot open. Now, on the base spec car, there's no button back here to open the boot from the rear end, which is really quite annoying. You have to do it either from the key or from inside the car. It's another thing that makes that Elite model just look a little bit more appealing. Because that car has proximity entry, there is a button on the boot in order to open it. And the Elite's key fob also has a remote start, which is a nice feature for warming it up on cold days or cooling it down on hot days. So it is a little value proposition that you might not pick up on a 15-minute walk around in the showroom, but really will reveal itself over time. But it is a big boot on both specs of this car. 474 litres of space across all of the sedan models. It goes back a really long way. It's really deep. We also have pull tabs here to lower down those rear seats if you want to carry really long loads. In terms of special features, not really any. We don't have any hooks or anything like that, but underneath this boot floor, we actually have a full-size spare. So new cars with full-size spares are becoming quite rare. This is one of them. Certainly peace of mind if you're going to be doing a fair bit of country touring in the i30 Sedan. So what's the new i30 Sedan like to drive? Well, this is a pretty new experience actually, because this is the first Hyundai that I've driven on the new K3 platform, which is the new small car platform for this brand. The i30 hatch will probably migrate across to it for its next generation, but as I mentioned, if you want a sedan, you're basically getting a first look at this new platform that uses 15% more high-strength steel, and it's just generally stiffer and better than what the i30 hatch sits on. Now, that's certainly not a bad car in terms of driving dynamics. In fact, it's pretty good actually, better than it needs to be. And that's basically the effect you get in the i30 Sedan as well. There's a quick summary of how this car drives, better than it needs to, with a few caveats, and we'll go through those in turn. First of all though, a shout out to Hyundai's local development of this car, because that just really helps. It just makes it feel so fluent on a country road. You know, it is a little firmer because Australians like good body control. That's a trait that we prefer in cars. We don't really like sloppy cars, and so the i30 Sedan really does avoid feeling sloppy. It does mean it's a little bit choppy around town at times, particularly because we only have the torsion beam models here launching today, and so just the rear end compliance can be a bit stingy over bumps in town. But when you take the i30 Sedan out onto a country road and you start turning up the pace, this car really does make a lot of sense, and you can tell that a lot of time and effort was put into tuning the suspension for the roads we get right here in Australia. So that's pretty cool. But we need to talk about the engine before we get to ride and handling. And we only have the 2-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder here. We have a multi-port injection 2-litre 4-cylinder producing 117 kilowatts of power and 192 newton meters of torque. Now, it is a new engine. It's a SmartStream G engine, so this isn't old tech, and it doesn't feel too bad. It's just slow, essentially. You know, foot to the floor here, accelerating up this hill. It gets the job done, and I don't think many people are going to notice that this car is too deficient on the open road, but it does mean that you need to plan your overtaking a little bit better. And compared to something with a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, Volkswagen Golf, for example, with 250 newton meters of torque just above idle, it just needs to be worked a little bit harder. Now, it is a bit of a momentum car in that if you've got your pace up already, you can certainly keep it going because the chassis is more than good enough to hold your speed once you already do have those runs on the board. It's just that you can't let your speed drop too much, or else you just end up in this torque hole. The auto tries to keep up and to some extent does a good job, but you know, really we need a turbocharged engine here, and that's exactly what we're going to get in the forthcoming i30 Sedan N-Line, which has a 1.6 litre turbo engine, 150 kilowatts of power, 265 newton meters of torque, and as we know from driving that engine before, it's much more of a performer. It'll be a better fit for this chassis because it actually is so balanced and capable. In the corners, you actually want a bit more power and torque to make use of it. At the moment, the 2-litre ain't troubling the chassis one bit. You just want a little bit of extra pace as a driver. That being said, if you don't care about any of that stuff, there's nothing wrong with the 2-litre, apart from the fact it's pretty thirsty. I got 7.5 litres per 100 Ks out in the countryside. So in town, that figure's likely to be about 10, which is quite a lot for what is technically a small car. It's in fact likely that the 1.6 might be no less economical. So that's definitely worth considering if you do care a little bit about performance and also fuel economy. Now, ride and handling, the steering's actually quite nice in this car. Not a huge amount of feel or feedback, but the ratio is right. It's fairly direct, and you know, you get instantaneous response from the front wheels. Sadly, we're on Kumo Extra tires, so grip levels are a bit sketchy, especially today. It's raining, not the grippiest. That being said, the chassis is actually a bit of fun because even though we've lacked for a bit of grip at the front end, the car does shuffle around a little bit. The rear end likes to step out a bit under braking if you're cornering really fast, and it's totally controllable, and the ESC reins it in anyway. So even though grip levels at the front end haven't been that high, they'd be better if there was better rubber on the car. It is actually quite a bit of fun to kind of manhandle down a country road and really feel the care put into the local tune for this car. And I know I've already made commentary about that, but you know, it just soaks up bumps on country roads so well. It's a car that you really feel would be a good partner if you did do country miles. You'll also benefit from the peace of mind of that full-size spare, of course. I know a lot of people in the comments want me to mention full-size spare and give them a bit more credit, and that's exactly what I'm doing for the i30 Sedan, so good work there, Hyundai, with that size of spare wheel. In terms of refinement, it's actually not too loud, it's not too quiet either. I'm on course chit right now, 85 k's an hour. You can tell me what you think of the road noise, but for myself, I didn't think it was too loud, and I've driven actually quite a few entry-level luxury cars that are a fair bit louder and less refined than this vehicle is. The view out is good, the window line is quite low, so visibility is nice. You know, it's better than some SUVs. We can really see all around this car. And speaking of SUVs, the agility, the handling is just on a different level. So, you know, that's why Hyundai are kind of describing this car as an alternative to an SUV for people that do want a second car or even a first car, given, you know, how roomy this thing is. It really can compete on those practicality levels as well. It really just comes down to the fact that, you know, there are different engine options out there in other small cars. The Toyota Corolla is available with a super fuel efficient hybrid in the Corolla Sedan, which blows this thing out of the water for fuel economy. Skoda, the Octavia, you know, you can get a 1.4 litre turbo, which is both economical and punchier in terms of a drivetrain. So I would say the entry-level engine is where the i30 Sedan falls behind a bit, but very much looking forward to the turbocharged N-Line. and also plenty of spy shots out there now of the full-fat i30 Sedan N, or at least that's what you'd absolutely have to expect that car is. Looking good on bigger wheels and with very N-sounding exhaust on it. That thing should be absolutely great, given that the basis, the chassis under this car actually feels really nice. Safety though is where the i30 Sedan holds back a lot of points. We have plenty of standard features, AEB that can detect cars, pedestrians, cyclists, and also it works for junction. We have lane keep assist with lane centering, which is actually quite strong on its most sensitive setting. Really wants to keep you in the center of the lane. We also have blind spot monitoring. And then in the Elite model, which I'm driving now, you step up to other technologies like rear AEB. That really should be standard across the range, but it is great to see Hyundai adopting it full stop. Rear cross traffic alert with AEB built into that function as well. So we really are starting to see some pretty sophisticated safety features rolling out on Hyundai's small cars. Now that does drive up the price a little bit, and I do want to make a comment about the fact that this car isn't going to arrive on the market with an ANCAP crash rating. ANCAP might choose to buy the car and test it, but Hyundai aren't going to do that for ANCAP. Partially that's because we don't have a center airbag, so it can't get 5 stars, even though it's got all of this crash avoidance tech. So that's kind of an emerging issue in terms of crash testing here in Australia, is that because the requirements are now there for junction AEB, which this car has, and a center airbag, which it doesn't have, you know, there are very, very stringent box ticking exercises for a 5-star crash rating, and I think that means we're going to see more and more cars that maybe missed one box and therefore are ruled out of a 5-star, just not getting rated by ANCAP. And you can let me know what you think down below in the comments. So that's a detailed look at the new 2021 Hyundai i30 Sedan, or Elantra, depending on where you're watching from in the world. This is actually a really tidy small car. It gives you good reasons to not buy an SUV, primarily among them if you're looking for more agile and more sporty driving dynamics than you might actually expect at this price and in this segment. This thing is actually pretty good to drive. That said, it is hard to get a really close reading on what this chassis is capable of, because at the moment that 2-litre engine certainly isn't stressing the chassis, so I'm looking forward to driving the forthcoming N-Line with a 1.6-litre turbo, which should land before the end of 2020 here in Australia. But in terms of first impressions, I'm pretty positive about this car. But I'm keen to know what you think, so let me know down below the video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.